This week on Political Capital, building a presidential campaign on the debt ceiling and tax cuts. Former Minnesota governor and Republican presidential candidate Tim Pawlenty is our guest. And on the last word, deadlock in Washington, who's winning the debt ceiling fight? From Bloomberg headquarters in New York, we begin the show with Republican presidential candidate Tim Pawlenty. Governor, thank you for being with us.
Delighted to be with you.
The president had his second news conference in 5 days this week to talk about the debt ceiling. He said 80% of the public in polls favor a balanced package, which he defines as $3 of spending cuts for every $1 revenues, and that politicians will pay a price if they play games with the debt ceiling.
Well, a couple of things. One is I think it's important to understand how we got in this mess, and if you look at...
But you don't agree with what the president said today?
No, I don't. But I think for this reason, let's see how we got here. And we didn't get here by being undertaxed. We got here because government spending at the federal level has been growing dramatically faster than the rate of growth of the private economy. And then number two, as to the solution, the president needs to stop lecturing everybody every 24 hours and get the deal done and get something done that's structural and permanent. And look, the Republicans
so these press conferences are really lectures and posturing.
Well, he's certainly spinning, but we got to solve problems, and I wish they didn't raise the debt ceiling. But if they're going to do it, Al, we need to get something structural that's meaningful and measurable that will get the country back on a better track.
Let's get to that in a minute. We'll talk about getting the debt ceiling done. Mitch McConnell, as you know, has a proposal to get the debt ceiling done, where the president has to come back with spending cover. Could you support the McConnell proposal?
No, I don't like it. I think it's a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
Bad idea?
Well, it's just not going to solve. It doesn't solve the problem.
So you're against the McConnell proposal?
I don't like it.
Okay. Let's talk about if the debt ceiling isn't raised. You've said, hey, it's not going to be a crisis. We can deal with it. And the Treasury should pay outside creditors first. That means Chinese bondholders get preference to an Army sergeant in Afghanistan?
When I wrote that op-ed, it was January or February, and moving the money around internally works for a while. But it doesn't work forever. So the first deadline was April, then it was May, then it was July, now it's August. So eventually the gig's up.
If we default, what should be the priority? Who should be paid first?
Well, of course, the outside creditors. Of course.
Before Social Security.
Well, to take away the false choice between a default to outside creditors and raising the debt ceiling or doing it incorrectly or unwisely.
You just have
pay the interest on the outside obligations first.
And then Social Security.
Then the military, and then the rest. But again, I argued 6 or 8 months ago to do that temporarily to buy the time so you could get to the debating and enacting the real fixes. Now they've lost that opportunity, and now they've got their backs up against the wall at the 11th hour.
You don't think there'll be a default, do you?
I don't think there should be a default.
We shouldn't default.
Will be? No, I don't think there will be.
Okay. Let's talk about your economic plan. You have a tax plan which you've described, and many agree is the boldest tax plan out there. You would drop the top rate to 25%, eliminate taxes on dividends, capital gains, and estates. And I suspect many people watching this show would like that idea.
And cut the corporate rate from 35
exactly.
to 15.
Let's stay on the individual side for a minute. Bloomberg reported that this would be the biggest tax cut ever, and that the top 1% of wealthiest Americans would get an average tax cut of $1.4 million a year. Wow.
Well, look, if you're into wealth redistribution, vote for President Obama. If you're into growing the economy so the other 97% of us can have jobs and pay our mortgages and put gas in our car and get our kids to college, then vote for me. Because I don't really think the main issue in the country is whether some small percent of the country gets a little more wealthy or a little less wealthy. I think the issue is the economy overall has to grow, and we've got to provide jobs so that the 95% or so of the country that depends on jobs for their quality of life has them available to them. That's what I'm after.
Well, America's in a fiscal bind, though, and sacrifices, maybe small ones, are being asked of seniors, of middle-class college students, of health researchers. What sacrifice does Tim Pawlenty ask of top CEOs whose compensation went up 23% last year, or Warren Buffett? What single sacrifice?
Well, again, I'll answer that. But again, I don't look at this from a wealth redistribution standpoint. That's not the measure of our country. The measure of our country are jobs growing, are we providing jobs? But on your question, in my reform plan, I look at means testing part of Social Security, specifically the cost of living adjustment. So if you're wealthy, you won't get that. If you're middle income or low income,
CEO's compensation is going up 23%.
Well, it's not government's place to set compensation. You really want the government coming in and telling a company?
No, I'm not talking about, but I'm saying there is some sacrifice that's being asked of a whole lot of people. Again, we're saying this can be small, but it's manageable. But of the rich, there's no sacrifice being asked.
But again, if you want to have wealth redistribution or focus on what percent of the top 10% are paying in taxes, and by the way, they're paying a bucket load already, then vote for Obama. That's his argument. If you want Robin Hood, vote for Barack Obama. If you want to get the economy overall moving and do the things that are going to require you or help you get a job, vote for me.
Okay, we'll get there. The sine qua non then is tax cuts are not increasing taxes. Explain to me then. Bill Clinton, 1993, increases taxes, 23 million jobs over the next 7 years. George W. Bush, 2 big tax cuts, not as big as yours, but big, a measly 3 million jobs. Why?
Well, there's other things that go on. So if you go back to Reagan, for example, and you isolate the effect of the Reagan tax cuts,
right.
I don't think there's any dispute. They not only cut taxes, but they grew government revenues. But what they also did at the same time is raise government spending. Under my plan, I propose to cut taxes as well as cut spending.
Reagan also increased taxes in 82, 83, and 84, right?
Well, that's also true. But nonetheless, see, if you look at it on a net basis, he was a tax cutter, not a tax raiser.
He was.
I think you can concede that point.
Yep.
But I don't think anybody's debating that we need to do these things to make the tax burdens and burdens of government lighter on our job providers. The people who want to start and grow business in this country, Al, all say the same thing. It's too costly, too difficult, too slow, overregulated, too discouraging, too uncertain.
And you have said that your calling card in this race is your record as governor. You've contrasted it to Congresswoman Bachmann and even to Governor Romney. But let me ask you this. The central issue is jobs. I just looked up the other day. Under John Huntsman, 5.9% job growth when he was governor. Rick Perry, 12.5%. A lot more than under Tim Pawlenty. Why shouldn't? What do you have that Huntsman and Perry don't have?
Well, a couple of things. One is I operated in a blue state, so we're taking it from way over to the left to something more mainstream, and so you got to look at the starting point. But in Minnesota, when I left office, we had one of the lower unemployment rates in the country, and post-crash, our job growth rate was one of the fastest in the country. So if you look at it overall, I cut taxes, I cut spending, I did school reform the right way, I did health care reform the right way.
So you'd be better than Perry or Huntsman?
Well, yes, but I also didn't start with Utah or Texas as the starting point. I had the land of McCarthy, Mondale, Humphrey, Wellstone, Ventura, and now Al, United States Senator Al Franken. And so it's one thing to rubber stamp, a conservative legislature's work. It's another thing to move the needle in a state like Minnesota.
As president, could you envision openly gays or lesbians in your cabinet?
Yeah, I mean, in my case, look, I'm not a supporter of gay marriage,
right.
But I've had many appointees, several appointees,
so
who
that's
fit
not
that
an issue
description on the merits,
right.
And so I don't view that as a reason why you would or wouldn't pick somebody for a position in office.
Okay. Your campaign has been depicted as struggling. You've said, hey, it's early. Campaigns always struggle early. But you have an Iowa straw poll coming up in less than a month. Are you going to win that?
I don't know that we'll win it, but
Will you finish at least a close second?
We need to be showing progress. So the Des Moines Register poll, which is a credible poll, had us in 6th or 7th place. So we need to move up from there for the straw poll in 60 days or now 50 days. And then we need to be in a position to win. I'm going to press you just for a minute. What's moving up, first or second? Top few. Top 3? Well, we're not putting a number on it. We just got to show significant improvement. And part of it is also who else is in that mix. Right. In terms of their viability going forward. Governor Tim Pawlenty, thank you so much for being with us today in this conversation. When we come back, make or break time for debt ceiling talks. Bloomberg reporters are next. Welcome back. A big deal or any deal? How will Washington deal with a deficit? Bloomberg News congressional reporter Heidi Przybyla and White House correspondent Julianna Goldman join me now from Washington. You all are too young to remember a movie called Rebel Without a Cause where they played a game of bluffsmanship and someone drove over the cliff. Julianna, we going to drive over the cliff come August 2?
What I do remember from last week, Al, is me predicting that there would be a grand bargain agreed to. So I feel weird being in the prediction business, but I think the White House right now is pretty confident that we will not be driving off a cliff come August 2nd. And Heidi, is that same confidence exhibited by congressional Republicans?
Republicans are already starting to put the brakes on, Al. You see some of the Republicans like Speaker Boehner tempering their earlier rhetoric about August 2nd being an artificial deadline. You see Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell coming out with a plan for an emergency backstop plan to prevent a default.
How about the rank and file? Can John Boehner deliver his caucus? Can Mitch McConnell deliver his caucus? Because it's highly unlikely that they're going to be able to pass this with predominantly Democratic votes.
That's true, and what you're seeing here is the outlines of a smaller deal plus, and the plus is kind of the key here, because I think Speaker Boehner is realizing that he's just not going to be able to do this with Republicans only. No matter what he does, the smaller deal is not going to fly with at least 50 to 80, I'd say, Republicans in his caucus, and so he's going to need Democrats. So what they're looking at is this $1.6 trillion deal, and they're trying to consider ways in the next week, that's how they're going to spend this time, to augment that to maximize Republican support in the House. But no matter what, it's going to have to be bipartisan.
Or they're looking for cover so they can have votes that don't count, and they can go home and say, well, we really did this. $1.6 trillion, of course, that sounds like a lot of money, but it's over 10 years, doesn't involve any revenues, and doesn't involve any really significant things in entitlements, which everyone from Simpson Bowles on says drives the long-term deficit problem.
That's true, but what we're looking at here is a much more kind of a backstop approach that would be on top of Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's plan to kind of just get us through this hurdle. And if they adopted that, one of the things under discussion right now is creating, yes, yet another commission that would look at potentially tackling those longer-term issues.
Another commission that we can ignore again. Julianna, let me turn to you. Will the White House be able to sell $1.6 trillion of cuts, no revenues, to the Democratic caucus in the House and Senate?
The president has no choice. He is going to have to sell it. And he even admitted in his press conference it is going to be a tough sell, and $1.6 trillion in cuts. There are going to be a lot of bitter pills in there to swallow.
The White House realizes, however, I think, that whatever happens, that one of the great appeals of the grand bargain was that they could have gotten some real stimulus. And even though he seemed to tell our Hans Nichols today that, yeah, we still hope to get payroll tax, that's not really job stimulus. That's really out the window now, any kind of real job stimulus, isn't it?
As you were saying, the pluses of a grand bargain is they would have been able to have gotten some stimulative measures in there. The president, even as late as the last negotiation session this week, was talking about wanting to get an extension of the payroll tax break, an extension of unemployment insurance benefits. The fact is those don't expire until the end of the year, so they do have time to be able to get that through. It doesn't sound like, though, that's going to be part of any sort of deal, even a $2 trillion deal.
Heidi, the president in a press conference kept citing 80% of the public is for a balanced package, which is, of course, his position. What are the polls telling us?
The polls are supporting him to a certain extent on that, and that Americans favor some of the tax proposals that he's pushing about closing corporate loopholes, also increasing taxes on the wealthy. But what they're also saying, and this is an ominous warning for Republicans at this point that I think is being reflected in some of the rhetoric, is that the latest Quinnipiac poll showing 48% of Americans to 34% would blame Republicans for a default.
Inside that Republican caucus in both bodies, who are the winners, who are the losers? Boehner, Cantor, McConnell?
I would argue, Al, there's no real winners in this. There's only who comes out of this, how scathed did they come out of this. And I would argue that the biggest potential loser in this would be the Speaker, because he has no good options at this point. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, he may fare a little bit better in that he's come up with this plan that might avert a default, and he's allowing his members to get, avoid having to vote for increased revenue. So the person who might benefit the most could be Cantor, just to the extent that he benefits from Boehner's woes.
He also probably revels in the fact that he's the one that took on Barack Obama at the White House the other day, and then told everybody about it.
That's true. When he came out of that meeting, he went immediately to Capitol Hill and told reporters about the testy exchange that the two had.
And Julianna, how does the White House view the Cantor-Obama back and forth?
Well, of course, the White House would say that this was not as dramatic as Majority Leader Cantor explained it to be. The White House acknowledges, sure, there are frustrations on both sides. They're hoping, though, that the talks heading into this weekend are going to be able to change the narrative a bit.
We know they're not going to get the big deal, but the president, one thing this has changed is the president is more open, more public. This is a president who hadn't had a press conference in, I think, 3 months. We've now had 2 in 5 days. Why is he Why is he so open these days?
As the president has been out there more selling to the American people the consequences of a default, going on CBS, finally ratcheting up, saying that if they do if they don't extend borrowing authority as of August 3rd, he's not going to be able to send out Social Security checks. So it was just a matter of time, I think, before they really wanted to use the bully pulpit here. And I think it also does show the seriousness of what we're talking about, the potential pitfalls for this economy. And then, of course, heading into the 2012 election season and what this could mean for the president's reelection.
Very quickly, Julianna, does Obama think this has positioned him well, or is there a problem for 2012?
On the deficits, what they think they're able to do is to neutralize the argument that Republicans can carry the torch on deficit reduction. He's now pushed for the big deal. Republicans can't really claim that anymore. But what it doesn't do, Al, is fix the job situation.
All right, Heidi, Przybyla, Julianna, Goldman, thanks a lot. When we come back, life after August 2, the last word right after this break. Welcome back. We'll go to Margaret, Carlson, and Cato Byrne in just a moment. But first, let's fast forward to August 2 and find out what awaits us if the debt ceiling isn't raised. Bloomberg's national correspondent Lizzie O'Leary joins us with details. Lizzie, it's August 2. There's a default. What's the first thing Tim Geithner and his minions have to do?
Well, the first thing they have to do is decide whether or not they're going to prioritize their payments. They probably will. They probably have the legal authority to do it. We are in murky, uncharted waters. But if they did that, they could decide who to pay first. The bigger problem, Al, is there's only about half the money coming into Treasury that needs to go out the door. They've got to make some $172 billion in payments in the month of August. They have that coming in, and they have to make about $306 million.
So there are no automatic priorities, bondholders or Social Security. It's just their choice.
It's their choice, but they would almost automatically pay bondholders first. And if you sort of game it out, if they were to pay, say, bondholders, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense vendors, and do unemployment insurance, that means that you can't do things like pay the troops. And obviously, that is not going to be popular.
Or air traffic controllers. I mean, there's some things that...
Or air traffic controllers for federal agencies. It's a big mess.
Well, how about Social Security? Can you pay that out of the trust fund?
This is a really murky question. Obviously, there is a trust fund. It's about $2.6 trillion right now, but it's unclear whether you can actually do it. Benefits actually get paid from the general fund. You could do a complicated one-for-one bond swap, but no one really knows if it's A, legal, and B, workable.
Lizzie, Moody's and others say they would downgrade the U.S. credit rating if it's default. Is that a big deal?
It's a huge deal. If we defaulted, we would go to a D. That's a big old mess. You're talking about some 7,000 state and municipal securities that would depend upon that. Credit markets likely get roiled. Even the threat of a downgrade, if not to debts, to junk status, is significant because you have a lot of big investors, pension funds, who have to hold AAA securities, and that would cause a mess for them, even if we're talking about just a downgrade, not a default.
Well, Lizzie, thank you very much. And don't make a lot of plans the next 18 days, because I think this may be a drama that goes to the end. Let me go to Margaret and Kate right now. Will there be a default on August 2, Margaret?
Wall Street called Capitol Hill, and the Republican leadership, they got the message. Thank you, Wall Street said, for preserving our Gulf streams. But they're no good to us if you burn down Washington. Stop the nonsense. Mitch McConnell comes out with a plan. John Boehner's reasonable. The impediment is Eric Cantor, but there will not be a default.
These are going to be lightning rounds. Cato Byrne, tell me, will there be a default on August 2?
Al, late this week, some negotiations, I think, point the way to avoiding a default. If there is a plan that postpones tough choices indefinitely, avoids accountability for politicians, and pretends that some different group of Republicans and Democrats can bridge irreconcilable differences, that is a winner and could avoid the default.
Okay, if it goes that way, if it goes anywhere the way it appears it might go, who wins out of this, Barack Obama or Eric Cantor? Kate?
I have different winners, Al. My winners would be Mitt Romney, Tim Pawlenty, John Huntsman. What a fabulous time to run against Washington. Has it ever looked more dysfunctional?
Well, how about you, Margaret? Any of those, or Eric Cantor, or Barack Obama?
I think surprisingly, maybe John Boehner looking reasonable in this whole process, maybe Mitch McConnell saving us from default, and anybody who isn't in Washington now looks better than anyone who is.
But John Boehner may win in the public opinion eyes and not in his own caucus eyes.
He may get a primary for doing it.
Let me ask you this. Let's turn to presidential politics. Rick Perry, governor of Texas, in or out, Margaret?
There's a front page piece in the Washington Post, mostly written by his staff, saying how many Republican leaders wanted him to get in and how the field is inadequate. He gets in, and we'll see if he's Fred Thompson, who got in late and didn't succeed, or a new breed.
Kate, Rick Perry, in or out?
Al, people I talk to on the other campaigns, and they're certainly watching it more closely than anyone, tell me they think he's in, and based on what I'm hearing about who he's talking to and calling, I agree. I think he's getting in.
All right, let me ask you this, Kate. If he gets in, first test will be in 5 months or 6 months, Iowa caucuses. Michelle Bachmann versus Rick Perry. Who's your money on?
My money would be on, well, my personal money wouldn't be on it, but I would bet somebody else's money on favorite daughter, Michelle Bachmann. She might not be everyone's cup of tea, even among conservatives, and some conservatives who like her worry about her lack of experience. But people who do will be splitting their vote among a Huntsman and a Pawlenty and maybe a Perry. I'd give it to Michelle Bachmann at the moment.
How about you, Margaret?
I think Iowa activists will give her the straw poll and then will not have to give her the caucuses. And Perry will have been in long enough. She will have imploded by then, and he will beat her.
I have to break the tie. I'm sorry. I side with Kate. Michelle Bachmann eats his lunch in Iowa. We'll see. Thank you both for joining us, and thank all of you for joining us. We'll see you again next week.